I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
CJ, we spent all of Monday's episode talking about William Nylander. And I have to admit, I thought that was going to be the big story of the week. And then the Cutter Gauthier trade happened. The Cole's notes of this, 5th overall pick for the Philadelphia Flyers. You think everything's all right on that point until he starts ghosting them and ultimately tells them he doesn't want to play for them anymore. That is somehow kept secret from everybody. And earlier this week, we learn he gets traded to the Anaheim Ducks for Jamie Drysdale and a second-round pick. So many questions, so many angles to unpack. CJ, when you heard this trade happen, what was your genuine reaction?
Oh, I mean, it was pretty apparent right off the bat. Like, wow, this is a significant move that I didn't see coming. I don't think very many people saw coming. Even, I've talked to some executives whose teams were involved at some point in trade talks with the Flyers where Gauthier's name came up, but they, at least the ones I talked to weren't aware that there was necessarily this issue brewing behind the scenes. They saw it more as, a new front office in Philadelphia, everything's kind of on the table kind of thing. And so, I think that maybe the fallout since the trade has taken a lot of people off guard. I mean, there's all kinds of angles here. I think it's worth revisiting just quickly because it will help frame our discussion, the timeline. Cutter Gauthier was the 5th overall pick in 2022. It was a different Flyers front office. Obviously Daniel Briere as general manager, Keith Jones as president were installed after last season. It was in May after Cutter Gauthier represented Team USA at the World Hockey Championship, where he informed the Flyers, at that point, new management team that he wasn't interested in signing. They didn't overreact to that per se. They wanted to give him time. They didn't make anything public. They, chose to give him some space. Ultimately, Gauthier doesn't come to their prospect development camp in July. And, obviously in the intervening months here, the Flyers' new management team was hoping to change his mind, was hoping to get an audience with him, was hoping to have a chance to sit down and figure things out. And they just were really never given that opportunity. And, I think that given those circumstances, and I know you're going to ask about the why, but given those circumstances, if you're in their spot, I think they made a reasonable decision here. A, to keep it very quiet, and B, to pull the trigger on a deal right after he was arguably the best U.S. player at the World Junior Tournament, where he won gold with his teammates over in Sweden. And so, they traded him, rather than extending this longer, where the writing was on the wall that he wasn't interested in signing with them. They got a pretty good return in Jamie Drysdale and a second-round pick. And then we're all left to try to untangle the web because, depending where you sit, the Flyers brass was pretty open here about, how perplexed they were, the efforts and lengths they went to try to break the freeze, and then ultimately how they ended up, pulling the trigger on that deal.
I do want to ask you about how you feel the Flyers reacted to all of this and how they spoke publicly about it. But I do also want to ask about that why, because it still doesn't make any sense to me. And I understand that Cutter Gauthier will eventually speak to the media and maybe we'll learn parts of his story, but I
wouldn't hold your breath on that.
Sure. Fine.
I mean, he's going to speak to the media, of course, but it seems like he and his agent, Kurt Overhart, are focused on moving forward rather than getting into the why this happened.
But moving forward from what? That's what's going to keep me asking why. That's what's going to keep asking. So many Philadelphia fans who, I get it, they may have already moved on and they're ready to boo him at the first chance they get. But I'm sure there are a lot of them that are wondering why. Like, I'm trying to figure this out. And for the life of me, I just can't do it. I can't figure it out.
Well, it feels like the well was poisoned potentially with the previous management regime in Philadelphia. To some degree, like it seems as though some of this relationship was already fractured before Daniel Briere took his post and Keith Jones came in as president. And obviously, I think where those individuals are frustrated or confused is, they've tried to maybe patch things up or see if there's something that could be done. And it appears that there's just been no interest at all in even engaging in that kind of talk. Ultimately, any prospect has the right to do this. I mean, If you're drafted out of the Canadian Hockey League, for example, if you don't sign for 2 years, you go back into the draft. And we haven't seen certainly a 5th overall pick, at least not in any recent memory, do something like that. What we have seen a lot though over the years, whether it was Justin Schultz back in the day, Jimmy Vesey, a number of other players who got drafted and chose to play out their NCAA eligibility, and then they become unrestricted free agents rather than signing with the team that drafted them. The difference with those players, they weren't picked top 5. I think that's really the, where this is different. And then of course, there's the fact that Daniel Briere says, after the selection was made in 2022, Cutter Gauthier said, I was made to be a Flyer. He initially, it seemed to indicate to the team officials he was excited about his opportunity there, and, ultimately then ends this way. So, it's within the rights of the player to have this. I think, where the team is frustrated is they never got an explanation as to why. And maybe that's where the debate is. Do you think that they owe him that? Do you not think that? I mean, it's kind of a weird system. It's hard for those of us that grew up as a chance to be a pro NHL player. I mean, you don't get to choose where you go work, essentially, right? And the way the CBA currently works, you got to play 7 professional seasons or reach age 27 before you become an unrestricted free agent, meaning you can go choose where you want to work. And so it's a weird system. And, I think if we knew more, we could probably dive in. Like, is this the start of more of a player empowerment kind of thing? Might other prospects consider this? But it's hard to know without having more details if this is just one isolated, very specific case and we'll never know the true reason why, or if it's maybe the start of a trend.
Am I weird for thinking of other similar situations where guys didn't want to play for the teams that drafted them, and in at least most of those cases, we had some reason? I mean, the Philadelphia Flyers got Eric Lindros because he didn't want to play for Quebec City. He didn't trust the management over there, right? Adam Fox, it seemed like he would just want to play for an American team. For Cutter Gauthier in Philly, I get it. He grew up a Pittsburgh Penguins fan. I'm still curious. I'm always going to keep asking this question until we get something. Is it bonus money for real? Kevin Hayes denied any involvement in saying anything bad to him about the organization. I really want to know what this is.
Well, I don't understand the bonus money thing, because had he signed at the end of last NHL season, I guess you could put in there performance bonus for, say, playing 10 games or something that would be achievable. But, it wouldn't be like he was going to hit the main bonuses. Those are sort of baked in, Julian. And I wish I had them off the top of my head. I know one of them is 0.73 points per game. All these sorts of things. I mean, I don't know that he would have even hit the normal performance bonuses. So there might've been an element of that, but it's just hard for me to believe it's only that. There's been some people speculating about whether it's John Tortorella, being the coach in Philadelphia and his desire not to play for him. Kurt Overhart has said, flatly denied that. And, that one doesn't really hold water for me either, because even if you might not like the current coach of the team, any team and anyone in this circumstance, like, how long reasonably is John Tortorella even going to be your coach? I mean, if you're not really entering the league until, basically at earliest the end of the season or the start of next season. Look, I just have to believe he has his reasons. You just like to think a clear explanation to the team could have been given. And I mean, behind the scenes, I don't mean that he has to say that into a microphone, but that might've made the reaction from the Flyers brass a little less explosive, because they might have more clarity. And so when they meet the media, they might not say exactly what it is, but they might be able to hint at it. And, I think that they came across to me as almost exasperated, right? Like they're almost like throwing up their hands. Like, we don't know what the hell's going on here, but we had to deal with it. And so, I mean, look, this is the kind of drama we ask for sometimes, Julian, that we don't get enough of in the NHL. And so
we do.
I tend to lean pro player in general and think that players' rights are fairly restricted as it is in the CBA. And so he didn't do anything illegal here. He didn't break any rules. I mean, to be clear, he could have just played 2 more years in college and just become a UFA and sign with whoever he wanted to. But this is it's a very strange case, and we still have a few more questions than answers, I fear.
Look, I'm pro player just as much as you are. I just want to know why. And I'll stop saying why because I realize I'm getting really repetitive with that word.
You sound like
but...
the jealous ex here. Like you're like, I just want to know why. Give me some answers.
Baby, please tell me. Like I want closure. Maybe I do sound like that. But
do you know what's an element of this
something
we haven't touched on?
What
is one of the things that makes it extra kind of spicy or interesting is the Flyers organization is one that by and large most players want to be part of. Like it really is, it's a good place to play. There's a pretty, there's a great history for their team. There's a good fan base. They've always been known as an organization that really kind of goes the extra mile, takes care of their players. They are like, again, like a lot of organizations talk about family and stuff. Like, I feel like the Flyers are kind of like a family. Like it's a real, it's just not the sort of place you'd expect this for, right? It's not one of the small markets in the league or one of the cold places or a particularly terrible tax place or, it's not sort of the traditional story you might hear along these lines. This isn't Jacob Trouba, forcing his way out of Winnipeg. And again, that was his right. The trades worked out on both ends.
But we also know why that happened, right? He wanted to support his wife. He wanted to go to New York to support his wife. We know why that happened.
Of course. I'm just saying that, fair enough, because that answers your question. Your why itch got answered in that case.
That's my whole thing. I feel as if there's some kind of reasoning, whether we don't get the full story or not, there's something out there that, whether it's out there in the public or you and I have a conversation about, someone could tell me something. And it is just surprising to me that after all this time, we still have no real idea why he didn't want to play for the Philadelphia Flyers, an organization, as you're describing, that is a good organization. They're one of the more known teams in the National Hockey League, one of the more iconic franchises. Like, if you're a Philly guy, you're a Philly guy. And Cutter doesn't want to be a part of that.
And they're not in the middle of one of these rebuilds that has them like the Sharks right now. And I'm sure we'll get to that later in the show where they're, like the Flyers are in a playoff spot today. They're in the middle of a rebuild and they're still, a competitive team. Like I would think, again, as a young prospect and a chance to step into that team, like this is a good opportunity. This is not a rebuild like tear it down and we have to rebuild the whole thing.
Matvei Michkov's coming in 2 years.
Right. It's sort of like what, one of the beauties when Matthews and Marner, not to make this all about the Leafs, and Nylander came up in the NHL, they came up together and the team made the playoffs in their first full season together. Like those guys didn't have to experience the pain that, Connor Bedard was experiencing this year in Chicago before, obviously he's gone out injured now, but that was a tough season. Sidney Crosby's first year in Pittsburgh, they set pretty low bar in terms of points. I mean, he was asked to being carried a lot. I think that the beauty about the Philadelphia situation, at least from where I sit, I'm not saying they're all the way back. It's going to take some time still, but I don't think you're going to see them fall to last overall in the league at any point in the next few seasons. I think that they're already starting to swing up, and obviously they've still got a few more assets to sell at this deadline. Like I think it's actually a great spot for someone to walk into who can be a difference maker, be a first line player. So, yeah. I mean, look we're talking hockey reasons and all that. There could be off ice things. There could be, I mean, let's face it, there's any number of possibilities here and we don't know. And I think the reason it's days later and we still don't know is because a lot of the principles involved in this story aren't, I don't think they're bluffing. I don't think this is an elaborate, sometimes people make everything into a giant conspiracy, right? I think truly the Flyers don't know what's going on here. Obviously, I would assume Cutter Gauthier, his family, and his agent at minimum, that sphere has a pretty clear idea why it got to this point. But, it sounds like he's happy to be an Anaheim Duck. And I think similarly, the Flyers, because of where they're at, getting a 21-year-old right shot defenseman and Jamie Drysdale, I know he's had some injury issues last year in the start this season, but, if he gets back up playing at his top level and healthy and grows into a role there, I mean, he could be a top pairing defenseman for them in the very near future.
Tough to lose Drysdale, but they do have depth on defense in terms of their prospects, right? Guys like Noah Warren and Tristan Luneau are part of that. Pavel Mintyukov is there too, and I mean their forward core with Cutter now and guys like Mason McTavish. That's going to be a really interesting team to follow in the coming years, right?
I would think so. I mean, it's amazing. It's like the top defensemen grow on trees in Anaheim. I mean, you just go way back. You can start when they won the Stanley Cup, which is a long, long time ago now, 15 years, 16 years ago, whatever it is. They did that. They had Niedermayer and Pronger is pretty elite two defensemen of it. That team built around. And then in all the years since where they had very competitive teams, like look at the guys that they traded. Hampus Lindholm, who's been a stud in Boston. Obviously, Shea Theodore just won a cup in Vegas and has been a real mainstay for them. I mean, they've almost like lost good defensemen and still just seem to have more and more and more coming. And so I think that, this is it from the Anaheim end of this. I know the Ducks kicked this around for a long, long time. Their conversations with Philadelphia go back quite a while on the possibility of Gauthier, and they just ultimately determined we're dealing from a position of strength. They feel like they need a little more explosiveness offensively. Obviously that they have offensive talents there, but they don't have game breakers or enough of them, maybe is the best way to put it. I mean, Leo Carlsson, I know they're very high on, and he's had a great start to the year. He's finally unleashed now too. He's off his pitch count. His load management's ended, so he can play every game, provided he's healthy. And so, you hope you're taking the corner there, but they're also a team that has finished near the bottom of the league and haven't had any lottery luck, right? That they haven't, I know they get Carlson, high up in last year's draft, but they haven't won a first overall pick. And so they're trying to find creative ways to boost their program. And I almost want to hold back judgment because I'm certainly not like, you love what it looks like, but it reminds me a little bit of where we've been with Ottawa and Buffalo at various points, even Detroit. And it's like, you still got to see it to believe it. And, I think in Anaheim anyway, they're still lining up some of the pieces there. I mean, we've seen them sign some veterans, I think, to try to ease this transition, but there's still a lot of work there, I think, for Pat Verbeek.
There's one player from that Anaheim core I did not mention, and there's a reason for that, because I want to ask you about him later on in the show when I ask you about potential trade bait going around the NHL. We did go in a lot on Anaheim and Philly. I do want to move on to Connor Bedard, but we will touch back on Anaheim and that player I didn't mention. We should get to Chicago because Connor Bedard is out for the foreseeable future, 6 to 8 weeks with that fractured jaw. It means we will not see him at the NHL All-Star game. I get it. There's the Chicago games and all that, and guys like Mark Lazarus are going to have to find other story angles when it comes to covering that team. But for the general NHL community, I'm really bummed at the fact that we will not see him in Toronto for the All-Star game. How are you processing this?
Yeah, I'm okay with him missing the All-Star game. What I'm not okay with is him missing the new skills competition. Because I just think, what we've talked about it a little bit, but I love that they've reduced it to 12 players. So you're really focusing on the absolute stars of the weekend, hopefully. I mean, that's going to require all of them to have buy-in yet, and I don't have full confirmation that's going to be there. But I think that there is a pretty high level of buy-in. And I just love the idea of having among those 12, just off the top of my head, of the All-Stars this year, Matthews is going to be part of it. McDavid's going to be part of it. You could have had Crosby, who's there for the weekend, Bedard, maybe Jack Hughes, who's unfortunately out currently week to week in New Jersey. So maybe his, availability is in question. Nathan McKinnon. It could have been pretty cool. Like, imagine it got down to the last event and you're down to 2 players for $1 million and it's Bedard and Crosby or something. I mean, talk about iconic, that it reminds me of, what was it? Trout and Ohtani entering a World Baseball Classic. Like, it's like seeing something so special that only that exact event could bring together. Cause at that time, of course, they were teammates with the LA Angels. In this case, this is I think that something's lost there. The other thing I'm interested about with Bedard, and obviously too bad to see him injured in the way he was, took a hit from Brendan Smith. I don't think, certainly nothing illegal on the play, but just an unfortunate play in the middle of the ice, and catches him in the wrong way in the jaw and requires surgery on Bedard's jaw this week. But what about the Calder Trophy race? Like, it does sort of open things up. And I'm not saying that Bedard had 2 hands on that trophy by any stretch. I think he probably would have been the favorite on most ballots, had we cast them before his injury. But this does open the door. Like, some people might not remember this. Connor McDavid didn't win the Calder Trophy in his rookie year. And the main reason he didn't is because he suffered a collarbone injury and he ended up playing 45 games, I believe it was. And some voters just didn't feel that was enough to vote him the award. I actually had him number 1 on my ballot. because to me, I think literally the award is who's the best rookie in the league. Essentially, I think that's how it's defined. And I was like, this guy was still the best rookie in the league. We only saw 45 games. A freak play gets him injured, but he was still like a point a game player. He was electric from the minute he entered the NHL. And I remember thinking, like, we're going to look back and be like, what? Connor Bedard didn't win the Calder? Like, what were the voters smoking? But
right.
anyway.
But at the same time, the guy who won it,
Panarin, right?
Artemi Panarin. He's no slouch by any means.
By no means. But do you have the stats in front of you?
I don't have the.
Look at Panarin's rookie stats. I'm just curious about
that.
I'm not mad about this. This isn't me. Like, I've been holding this grudge for 8 years and just want to bring this up on this pod, but it's starting to feel like it could be a comparable decision, when it's time to do this year's ballots, because, 8 weeks potentially missed for Bedard is, that, could easily be 20 plus games, 30 games. I mean, I haven't done the counting on Chicago's schedule. Obviously the All-Star breaks in there too, but we might have this same decision. Then you got like Brock Faber. I mean, who else?
Connor Zary.
What's that?
Connor Zary in Calgary. I was looking at a tweet from Ryan Pike today. I think he's fourth among rookies in points. Marco Rossi in Minnesota as well. Minnesota has 2 candidates.
I know that Steve Dangle's already voting Joseph Wall in for the Calder. So
there were people early on who thought he would be a candidate. By the way, Artemi Panarin, 30 goals, 77 points in his rookie season in Chicago in 80 games played.
Okay, I mean that's full value for the Calder. I think he was 5 years older than McDavid, probably. You don't have to look that up, but I mean you get into all these arguments
for what it's worth.
What's that?
He's 32 for what it's worth. And McDavid's 20?
Right.
I don't remember exactly how old he is.
He had played, he'd played a bunch of pro hockey in Europe. We don't have to go into a big Calder thing right now. I am saying it's like something to have on your radar, because I do think, had Bedard played a full season, probably by the end of it, 70 to 80% of the ballots would probably have him number one. I'm not saying he was going to be unanimous, because, I think there are good counter arguments out there. And I really think Faber to me is a real good dark horse. When you see how much he's playing, how effective he's been, it can be difficult for a defenseman to win the award typically. But like, I would say he right now, if it's not Bedard, I would say it's Faber for me. But again, the beauty is we still have half a season, so my views can and will change before I actually have to fill out a ballot.
Yeah, I think Brock would get my vote too, but I also wonder if Connor Bedard is. I mean, I know he's going to be gone for a while, but he did so much in that time while he was playing, and depending on how he comes back from that injury, maybe that's enough. I don't know. Right now, if you're telling me to vote right now, I'd still pick Bedard, but Brock Faber probably is number 2. But I'm very intrigued in this race as well. I don't know. I think Connor Bedard's been an exciting player, an electric player, and we all can't wait until he gets back. He's just too good for the league right now. The
awards are wide open this year.
They are.
Like, the Hart Trophy isn't spoken for by any stretch.
Do you have a pick? If you had to, I'm not going to put you on the spot for every award, but if you had to pick a Hart Trophy winner right now, who would you pick?
I don't have it. I haven't studied it enough. I mean, look, it's kind of looking like McDavid's going to be right back where, the Oilers have won 8 in a row now. I just saw the stat today. I think he has 39 points in his last 19 games. Like, it wasn't that long ago, probably 19 games ago, he was like 100th in league scoring, and now he's right back where he usually is. Kucherov's having a monster year, but Tampa's out of the playoffs. That's, if they've also come on of late here. I'm certainly not saying they're missing the playoffs, but if they do, that could hurt his candidacy. The Jets, could Hellebuck. I mean, I know Hellebuck's going to get a lot of love for the Vezina. Could he get some Hart Trophy love? I mean, maybe. Good question. I could see him there. Obviously McKinnon had a monster December. Would be remiss if we didn't mention him. So the whole I'm not at a point where I'm picking one, but those are the kind of names that are rolling off the tip of my tongue when you bring it up. But yeah, I think this year we're going to have an intriguing award season. I mean, maybe Quinn Hughes, he's got a pretty good lock on the Norris as of this minute, I would say, but there's a lot of debate to be had here as we get into the new year.
Can't wait until the end of season when we start comparing award ballots.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we got to do in March and April, because you get on the other side of the trade deadline. I mean, I guess you talk playoff races, but
Yeah.
you got to find content somewhere. So you and I got to argue about who the best player in the league is.
Yeah, we'll find content after March 8th. I can't wait until because I already know that you're starting to get tired with trade stuff. I
Not
always
yet.
look forward.
I'm still.
I think you're on your way.
Yeah, I'm not tired though. I'm still energized about it. It is starting to get real. I think it's far less hypothetical now. Like there's definitely more conversations happening around the league. You know, obviously we've seen a big trade made just this week. I mean, pretty specific circumstances, you know, why that happened in the early part of January, as I mentioned earlier, because the World Junior Championship ended. That's when the Flyers decided was the time to move on from Cutter Gauthier. But you know, now it's a little less guessing and it's a little more information based. And so I think that's where I start to feel better about it. I just get tired about it because we still got 8 weeks of beating the same names around and beating the situations around. I mean, you know, the one dynamic I can see shaping up though, like I don't know if you've been studying the standings too closely recently, Julian, but there is a glut of teams. You know, if you just take the East, like you have, and I'm not looking at it, but I know you have like Pittsburgh, Washington, New Jersey, Tampa, you know, then right up to Detroit. Like they're all in like a 2-point band right now. And some of those teams, you know, especially like a Pittsburgh, for example, could be, I don't see them necessarily being an aggressive buyer under any circumstances, but I could see them being a seller. Like I think that will be interesting as we get closer to March 8th, is just seeing who surges up and who's falling back and what that might mean for the decisions in the front office.
This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Factor. Get started on your resolutions with Factor so you're ready for the new year. Factor's ready-to-eat meal delivery takes the stress out of meal planning and sets you up for success in the new year. Skip the grocery stores, prep work, and cooking fatigue. Instead, get chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door. With over 35 meals to choose per week, including options like keto, Calorie Smart, vegan and veggie, and more, plus over 55 weekly add-ons, you'll have a ton of nutritious and flavorful options to kickstart your resolutions. Forget the frantic lunches and the rush dinners. The 2-minute meals from Factor are your secret weapon in the new year. You get to fuel up with fast, restaurant-quality meals, all delivered right to your door. Seriously, so many benefits to come with using Factor. And if you take advantage of the deal we've got with the CJ Show, you'll be on your way. Head to factormeals.com/Johnston50 and use code Johnston50 to get 50% off. That's code Johnston50 at factormeals.com/Johnston50 to get 50% off. This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Liquid IV. We're in 2024. You're going to hear a lot of people doing the whole new year, new me, but don't reinvent yourself for the new year. All you have to do is just rehydrate yourself with Liquid IV. With 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, plus 8 vitamins and nutrients for everyday wellness, Liquid IV hydrates 2 times faster than water alone, all in a single sugar-free stick, so you can feel like a hydrated new you ready to take on 2024. It's really easy to put together. All you have to do, get yourself a glass of water, get yourself the stick, pour it in, all these great flavors, white peach, green grape, lemon, lime. They're really tasty. They're really great to drink, and you get yourself hydrated. Very convenient packaging as well. Gives you a whole bunch of energy. And again, they taste really great. 1 stick, 16 ounces of water, 3 times the electrolytes, no artificial sweeteners, 8 vitamins, and non-GMO and free from gluten, dairy, and soy. Rehydrate yourself for the new year. Grab your Liquid IV Hydration Multiplier sugar-free in bulk nationwide at Costco, or get 20% off your first order when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code Johnston at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code Johnston at liquidiv.com. In the Western Conference, I was looking at this on Wednesday. There was like a 9-point difference between the Minnesota Wild, a little further down, but still not too far out of a wild card spot, and the LA Kings were third in the Pacific Division. Like it's just I think more people will end up catching on, but the Western Conference playoff race is everything is just it's crazy over there. And it's going to get crazy.
And it's funny because Edmonton's barely in a playoff spot right now, but like for like the last 3 weeks, we're like, okay, the Oilers are the Oilers again. Like I don't care if they're out of the playoffs. I know they're making the playoffs because once you saw them come back to life and their stars are clicking and, you know, Zach Hyman's just potting every puck. It seems like even the ones they take away from him on weird offside reviews.
Oh,
but
boy.
yeah,
boy.
I don't know if we have to open that hatch, but
you can if you want. If you have feelings on that, I do want to get to Ilya Samsonov being back with the Leafs, and I still have trade questions. But if you want to go in on Connor McDavid in the offside, by all means.
Well, I'll just keep it quick. I have long said the idea of reviewing offsides when it's so close that you have to rewind and zoom in and whatever McDavid's comment was, it's insane to me. I get that you want to miss the one out of every 15,000 calls where the linesmen or the referees get it totally wrong. There was years ago a Matt Duchene goal where he was like 7 feet offside. I still probably need glasses, Julian, and I didn't need my glasses on that night to see how offside he was. Like, of course you want the ability to bring back that goal, but when it's so close that the human eye can't even barely detect it, even on slow-mo replay, like, what are we doing? Like, I just think it's the dumbest rule. It slows the game down. It changes the momentum. It's one thing to have it in a game, in early January between Chicago and Edmonton. It's another when it's game 6 of a big playoff series and it could totally swing things in one direction or another. But I've lost this battle. Like, I actually remember writing, for me, a pretty opinionated column on this. I think it was during the 2016 playoffs. Whatever year Florida lost in game 7 to the Islanders and John Tavares scored in overtime for the Islanders in game 7.
Yeah.
Anyway, there was a crazy call in that series. And I remember writing like, what are we doing here? And it's 8 years later and really nothing's changed. So I'm sure the league didn't like that specific one because it was a 15-minute review in Chicago, but I'm not sure there's enough that's going to change minds about the need for this. So,
but what about the fact that we need to get these things right? We don't want to live in a world where we allow human error to dictate so much of the game where we just let stuff be wrong because the refs didn't take their time on something, right? Like, that has to be acknowledged in this too. I hate the offside review.
Yeah, but did they even really get it right?
That's a genuine question to be asked in all of this. I've talked to certain people about it, and then they made the case that they did get it right. But the fact that we still have to ask that question, it's entirely possible that they didn't.
It took 15 minutes. Doesn't that suggest that they're not even totally sure it was right? Like,
that's very fair too. I don't know, but
I'm not even sorry. Right.
No, please.
My position on this isn't that they got it wrong. It's just that if it isn't so clearly right or wrong, like, I just think what happened on the ice should stand. Like, did anyone on the ice stop playing at that moment? No. Everybody thought it was onside. Anyway.
Dude, don't apologize for it.
I just hate the Zapruder film stuff. I just think hockey is a game where there is a lot of gray.
Yeah, but you have to get that right. Like, I don't know. I mean, I don't.
Yeah, but you can't tell me they definitely got it right.
Great. I can't tell you. You're right. I can't tell you.
Here's what I can tell you.
That should be something we should just live with.
There was a play at the line that was so close that even 15 minutes at the people that are best at their job look at this film and they're not sure for 15 minutes. Like, what about just, hey, what happened on the ice was so close. Everybody played. The Blackhawks had a chance to stop the Oilers. They didn't. Zach Hyman. By the way, I heard a stat that Zach Hyman has the most disallowed goals in the last 2 years.
I had no idea we were even calculating that.
I saw it somewhere. I wish I could attribute it, and I don't even know. I can't verify it, so I'm out here like this is. But Zach Hyman has scored a lot of goals the last 2 years. Think of all the ones they've taken off the board from him.
Yeah, I just hope that it wasn't some big Edmonton Oilers fan just spreading misinformation. I'm willing to believe that could be true, but we should probably double check that. My last thing I'll say about this is just, I think the refs can at least say, it's inconclusive. We can't tell. Whatever we rolled on the ice, we can just go with that. It doesn't need to be 15 minutes. But I do think I do think there needs to be some kind of grace where the referees can look into something and get this right. And you brought it up earlier. If this happened in a playoff game, wouldn't you want them to take as much time as they can? Not too much time, but I don't know if we're reacting to this the same way. I love that soft grumble. It's like, oh God. All right, let's.
Well, just because I just think if it's so close that the human eye can't detect what's right and wrong, and the play happens, like how many calls are not made in the game that we don't go back and review? Like again, the one that's 10 feet offside and somehow it's missed and it's so obvious that everyone at home knows right away. You don't have to watch the replay more than once. Yes, let's fix that one. But these ones where it's like dancing along the line and I don't know.
Look, we can
bah humbug.
Yeah, well, it's January 10th. Christmas is already long gone. I've already got my gifts. You can't steal Christmas from me, sir.
I'm just old man yelling at Cloud right now. I like, damn with this technology. What are these kids ruining the game?
Okay, let's get you to Ilya Samsonov and the Leafs before you start coming up with boomer takes about something. He's back with the Toronto Maple Leafs, called up from the Toronto Marlies. What's next for him?
Who knows? I mean, this is a...
Wow. Okay.
Well, I mean, I'm actually not being glib here. This is a highly unusual situation. Have you ever remembered anything like this?
No. Well, not to the point where, I mean, Jack Campbell got sent down. He has that contract that he has, but he at least played in the AHL.
Yeah, and practiced and like joined the team.
Yeah.
So review the tape here. Ilya Samsonov loses a game in Columbus on December 29th. The Leafs allowed 21 shots. He let in 6 goals. They lost in overtime. Like, it's a total goalie loss. Like, there was no other reason that happened that night. If you remember Sheldon Keefe's post-game comments, I mean, he was trying to be polite. He wasn't actually trying to run the bus over his goalie. But, like, at a certain point, he can't be too critical of his team either, because when you hold the opponent to 21 shots, you should expect to win. They put him on waivers, passes through unclaimed, spends a week on his own working with Hannu Toivonen, who's a goaltending instructor in the Leafs organization. Has one practice in the American Hockey League on Tuesday with the Marlies, and then gets recalled Wednesday, is on the ice with the Leafs. And, you know, now the Leafs are heading into a situation. They have 3 games in 4 days with the Thursday, Saturday, Sunday coming up. Like, are they going to play him in one of those games? I'm not even here to tell you it's wrong. What I am saying, putting my cards on the table, I just don't know if it's right. Like, I don't know how I can appreciate, look, the Leafs have been pretty clear that this is partly a mental issue that Ilya Samsonov's dealing with, or that they're worried his confidence is shaken, that he's, really been in his own mind. And so they felt, just even getting, out of the spotlight of preparing for games, being at practices, having cameras on him, speaking to the media, just the whole bit, like the whole competitive day-to-day environment of a team, which would include even the AHL, that he could benefit from that break. I just don't know, when he hasn't played since December 29th, now we're at January 10th. So coming up on 2 weeks since he played a game, only a handful of practices with a full team in front of him. I just don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, really. And, there's no guarantee he's playing, by the way, in these next couple of days. I mean, they could recall Dennis Hildeby, who they sent back to the American Hockey League, and have him start one of the games on the weekend. I mean, one of the reasons Sheldon Keefe mentioned for this kind of flip-flopping is they wanted to get Hildeby in games because he's just been backing up in the NHL. Well, he could play for the Marlies on Friday. They have a home game, and then be recalled for the weekend himself. And maybe he's playing one of the games. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I go back to the fact that this is an unusual set of circumstances. It's been a really difficult and trying season for Ilya Samsonov. I got to tell you, I was there the opening days of training camp around the Maple Leafs. He didn't seem right from the opening days of camp. Like, he was struggling then. They didn't play him for the first couple games at all, exhibition games. Apparently he wanted kind of a different routine for camp. And, that's totally fine. There's 8 preseason games. Like, I'm certainly not saying your starter has to play even half of them, but it just feels like they've been managing him the whole year, and he just hasn't ever really found his footing. And I can appreciate that the Leafs don't want to give up on him. They saw enough last year, I think, to believe there's a good goalie in there. Really, the the challenge they're facing in the middle of an unrelenting schedule, an unrelenting season, a salary cap that paralyzes moves. They have to try to see if they can get them back up and running somehow. And I think the odds are stacked against them and him, quite frankly. And you saw that with Jack Campbell. I mean, this would probably be the counter argument. Jack Campbell was sent to Bakersfield and he's floundering down there with a, sub 900 save percentage and, hasn't fixed whatever, has been ailing him. And so, I mean, what do we even know about goaltending at this point? All I know is it's chaos this season. And this is, the only reason this isn't an even bigger issue, and I know everything in Toronto gets blown up as it is, but is because Martin Jones has been great for them. And, the fact they signed him as an insurance policy was a bit of a forgotten guy. He's come up and at least made the saves he's supposed to make. And then I'd say even a little bit more than that. Hasn't had to steal them a game. They've come through a pretty soft schedule. I mean, they won a big game in Los Angeles on the road last week, and that's a tough team to play against. They played really well in front of them. But since then, they played Anaheim and had 50 shots. They played back-to-backs with San Jose. It's been a pretty soft part of the schedule, and defensively, the Leafs' results have been strong, so they haven't been giving up too much. But, Martin Jones hasn't lost them the game where they only allowed 21 shots against, right? That's where this all started. I mean, when the argument is like, when do you start Samsonov again? Well, the game they started him on December 29th, that was supposed to be the game where everything got locked down, and it didn't happen. So I don't know where this goes next. I don't know. Do you know what? I don't think the Leafs know where it goes next. Like, they'd like to have a plan for him, of course. And I think they're doing what they can to do that. I think they really want to protect him, quite honestly, which is another thing. It's difficult to do in a media marketplace like this one. And when you're the number one goalie for a team, like, there's kind of nowhere to hide, right? On any given night, you could be blamed, whether fairly or not, for a loss. And so it's sort of a difficult position to be in. And I'm not sure where it goes.
Yeah, we're going to have to follow that one as that story materializes. I want to get to some trade talk while we still have a bit of time before we wrap up the CJ show here. I want to get to Trevor Zegras. It seems like his place in the Anaheim core isn't all that secure, and his name has been brought up in a couple different trade rumors. What are you making of that situation?
Well, I think we should be careful here. I think I don't know. I don't know exactly what rumors you're referencing. Like, I've started to see a little bit of speculation. My understanding of the situation is, it's no secret that he's a player that the organization has asked to do different things with his game, have had concerns even prior to now. I don't mean anything recently this week or anything, about his two-way play and things like that. Obviously, he's a young player still in the league. Natural to push a player like that. I mean, the Leafs spent a lot of years pushing William Nylander. This is normal, and look at what you get. I mean, sometimes it takes patience. And so I don't get the sense at all they've concluded they have to trade him. It's a big bidding war. I think maybe they realize they have to be open to the idea because, he's a positive value asset. There are at least 2 or 3 or 4 teams out there, I think, that would really like to get their hands on him. There's probably a longer list beyond that are thinking like, "Whoa, this could be good." Like, that are at least like, "Hey, should we be talking ourselves into this?" And so I think we have to see where it goes. I don't, as I say, I don't think that we should draw a straight line from one to the other. He was roommates with Drysdale. That maybe he hasn't always fit in well exactly what they were looking for in Anaheim, and they've wanted more out of him, so he's automatically gone. I think there's a chance. We've got another trade board coming out next week, Julian, on The Athletic, and I'd say there's a high probability Trevor Zegras' name will appear somewhere on that list, but I wouldn't even have him in the top 10 right now. I think that there's a chance he's traded, but by no means do I think it's a certainty or anything like that.
What about some of the other names we are probably going to find on that list? We bring up Calgary a lot because they have a bunch of pending UFAs. There are the reports with Noah Hannafin and potential talks of an extension, but also Elias Lindholm and Chris Tanev are on there. Yeah,
and you can add Jacob Markstrom's name, I think, to there. I mean, where Markstrom, of course, is different than his 3 teammates is he signed beyond this season. He's got a full no movement clause, so there's a world where he just says, "Hey, I don't want to move anywhere," and doesn't matter whatever Flames manager wants to do. So he's got a little different say or control than his teammates. But, Craig Conroy's been clear that he doesn't want to lose assets for nothing. It makes sense to me on some level that you're working parallel tracks. You're having discussions with the agents about what an extension would look like. You're having discussions with the other GMs to see, what a trade might look like. And you have to make the best decision that you can in the moment. Is it better to sign the player at this contract, or should we just, make a deal? And so I think that Calgary's working through that. But, Conroy, I think a lot will run through him in the lead up to this deadline period, no matter kind of how those situations shake out. Even if they were to extend Hanifin, this is a hypothetical still at this point in time. I mean, I still think he's making deals elsewhere, and even that will have ripple effects. If Hanifin comes completely off the market, then it's just one less higher end defenseman you can add out there. The Markstrom one will be interesting. I think John Gibson is another name to keep an eye on, just for they're in the same class, right? Because they both have pretty weighty contracts and commitment well beyond this year, and so it's not an easy trade to make by any means. But if any team really decides they have to step up and take a big swing in terms of getting an impact goaltender, I mean, I think you're basically shopping from a list of two with those two. And then if you look at the next class of goalies, you have someone like Jake Allen, who is signed through next year, veteran in the league, but probably not coming in to be a surefire number one somewhere. And then you're going to have some other names like Peter Mrazek, who's actually kind of having a low-key, under-the-radar season in Chicago. Capo Kakinen, who's unfortunately stopping pucks and facing a lot of shots in San Jose, so his numbers maybe don't look great, but I could see him being moved as a pending UFA. And so the goaltending market will be interesting. Normally there's not a lot of goalie trades, but this has been a weird year in net, and so I'm not offering any predictions 8 weeks out from the deadline. And
very wise and very sage of you to do that. You mentioned San Jose. You wrote a column on them for The Athletic and how they are not going through a great time. Can we touch off on that real quick?
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, the high level is they're comparing unfavorably with 90s era expansion teams in the NHL, which is really difficult thing to do. If for those of you that weren't around in the 90s, let Uncle CJ tell you about a time before there were loser points and before there were shootouts. And it was way more common there's more points on the table now in the league. And so when you're on pace for 42 points at the halfway point of the season, which is where San Jose is heading into Thursday's game in Montreal, you're being compared to like the expansion Atlanta Thrashers, the expansion San Jose Sharks, which lost 17 games in a row in regulation at one point. The expansion Ottawa Senators, which might be the worst team ever, certainly among them, won 10 out of 84 games when there was an 84 game schedule to the expansion Ottawa Senators. So the Sharks are better than that because they do have 9 wins through 41 games, but it's not looking too good. I mean, no team takes less shots and scores less goals, and no team allows more shots and allows more goals. They started the season with an 11-game losing streak. They were actually technically 0-10-1, 11-game winless streak for anyone out there. Then they went on a stretch through the middle of their schedule where they were 9-7 and a couple overtime losses. So, they steadied the ship, and now they've lost 12 games in a row in regulation at this point in time. And so, yeah, they're in one, man. That's the way David Quinn put it. I don't take pleasure in writing that column or anything and having to go and sort of ask those players what it's like. I mean, Mario Ferraro, after the game, he's a local guy from Toronto, sort of talked about what it's like to play in a 7-1 loss in the one game he gets to play in his home city in front of family and friends. And he even cited like mental health concerns for he and his teammates. So that's why I don't want to make, light of this, because I think when you lose that much, it can be very difficult. I don't really see a way out for them. Like they've been at their absolute worst here in those 2 games against Toronto. So you can't judge someone by their absolute best or their absolute worst. I mean, because the truth is somewhere in the middle. But even when they're, in more of a middling state, it's just, they're not very competitive. And this is what I would hold up as exhibit A of be careful what you wish for if you're out there wanting your favorite team, your local concern, to tear it right down to the studs. Because that's really what San Jose is doing, right? They traded Brent Burns, they traded Erik Karlsson, they traded Timo Meier last year. They've taken on a lot of contract dump players. They've added aging veterans. And you just kind of get a team where, and they're not at a point yet where their young players are pushing up and becoming difference makers. They haven't, they weren't fortunate to win the Connor Bedard lottery, right? So they drafted Will Smith at number 4 last year, but he's currently in the NCAA, so he's not helping anything in the here and now. And so there's a lot of lean nights when you do what they're doing. And I'll tell you, I felt bad. Honestly, I almost felt a little guilty. It's my job to go and, ask some questions of the players and the coach after a game like that. But it's very clearly that it's hit them hard, and they're on a long road trip here. I mean, it could spiral. I'll leave you with this. Since the cap era came in, only one team has lost more games in a row in regulation than this current run of San Jose, and that was the Buffalo Sabres of 2014-15, and they lost 14 in a row in regulation. San Jose currently sits at 12. They play in Montreal on Thursday, so they could get to 13 there, and then I believe it's Ottawa next on their schedule Saturday afternoon, where it could be 14. So, I mean, we really are talking recent history, historically bad start to a year. And again, the weird part is 11-game losing streak, a real respectable middle part of the schedule where they play teams hard, had all those crazy comebacks, if you remember, and then 12 losses in a row now, and still a lot of games left to play and nothing to play for.
Yeah, that's really tough for them. You should check out Chris Johnston's column on the San Jose Sharks on the Athletic website. Do you have a stick tap, sir, as we wrap up the CJ show?
A stick tap and a quick story. It was late in the lockout shortened 2012-13 season. I was a young reporter at Sportsnet at the time, and in the last week of that regular season, I spent 4 days in a row in Tampa, just the way the schedule allowed. For some reason, the Leafs were there for a number of days. And I recall meeting the new head coach of the Lightning, in the lobby of the hotel I was staying in, because he was also staying in it. His name was John Cooper. And I will tell you that when I first met John Cooper randomly in that hotel, and at that time really didn't know much about him, I knew a little bit about his past in terms of he had a crazy winning streak the year before in the American Hockey League with the Norfolk Admirals, but got a chance to socialize with him then. I could never have imagined meeting him that day and where the Lightning were as a team, how new he was to the league, that the same coach would still be the head coach of that team, and he would reach 500 career victories, all with the Tampa Bay Lightning. So I thought that was an amazing achievement by John Cooper. And it's hard to coach one team for 3 or 4 years in a row. I mean, you're talking legend status if you can win 500 games behind the bench with one organization. So, I mean, it helps that John helped the Lightning reach 4 Stanley Cup finals, a couple additional Eastern Conference finals. They've done a whole lot of winning there, but I will give my stick tap to John Cooper for doing the undoable and keeping one head coaching job for more than a decade.
That is really great. That is awesome. Congratulations to him. I'll just quickly give mine to Michael Backlund. He ties Mark Giordano for second most games played in a Flames uniform. But I especially want to give it to his daughters, who I think the cutest video you'll watch on social media all week is his daughters announcing the starting lineup ahead of their game against Ottawa earlier this week. Just amazing. And then after them, one of them just running over to Michael to hug them. That is one of the best things. That's what we call a timeline cleanser. That was a really good video put up by the Calgary Flames. So I'll give them a stick tap for that.
I love the team just started doing that in the last number of years, having a guest in to announce the starting lineup and then putting it out on social media. I think it's been a welcome addition to hockey Twitter, which isn't always a happy and heartwarming place.
Well said. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode of CJ Show. Subscribe to the SDPN YouTube channel. Subscribe to our podcast. Subscribe to the SDPN Discord as well. Subscribe to all of our things. We have a lot of great content to give you. For CJ, I'm Julian. So long, and peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.